Nicole Jones-Gerbino grew up in rural Florida. She started life in a food stamp line, and now she is president and co-owner of PBS Radiology Business Experts, a national healthcare service company, and the creator of the Owning It Leadership platform. Her keynote, From Welfare to the Boardroom, tells the through line: faith, hard rooms, and real people at the right moments got her there. She speaks to leaders, women, students, and healthcare audiences about authenticity, courage, and what it actually costs to lead without hiding. Nicole, let's chop it up. How you doing?
Hey, Tony. I'm great. Good to be with you today.
You could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us, and for that, we are grateful. Well, you know, Nicole, our audience, we like to give them the picture that they're at the kitchen table with us having this conversation. And oftentimes when you invite people to your kitchen table, you want to give that person an opportunity to tell people about themselves. So we're going to ask you that, Nicole. So who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's always good to be able to, be authentic, right? And I think at the end of the day, that's really where a lot of my story began, when I realized that, I want to be the same person in every room that I'm in. I want to be the same person at every table that I sit at, whether that's a boardroom table or whether that's someone's kitchen table or, whether that's some of the rooms that I grew up in. And, for a long time, Tony, I lived as though, there were two different parts of myself, a past part and a current, and then I realized that our stories are not there to be wasted. So at that point, I started really talking about how I grew up and, talking about some of the things that have shaped me and the rooms that have shaped me. And, I always felt that, maybe talking about those things would, taking the mask off, so to speak, right, would inhibit me in the business world or as a leader. And it did the very opposite. People just feel a lot more comfortable. They can see their own story or they can see a part of it when I share more of mine. So, to tell you who I am, I mean, I'm just a person like anybody else that has a certain beginning and, found themselves in a position of, really a blessing to be able to lead a company, to be able to lead people, and it's something I don't take lightly. And, I feel like your path shouldn't be wasted. Your story shouldn't be wasted. And so what I love more than anything is to be able to talk with people about, my nonlinear path, my delayed path in a lot of ways. And
yeah.
And being able to help them maybe see the potential in theirs. And I get to do that in my day-to-day job. I get to do that with people that I'm working with across the country, with our various different teams. And a lot of people have to have those separate lives. And, I feel really fortunate that I don't.
It's these life experiences that shape us. They afford us the ability to recall on some of those things when we're in a tough spot or even in good spots. Is those experiences that we can draw on. I speak a lot about angel work. I have a lot of doctors and nurses and practitioners that come on the show. And I believe people call certain things in life. I believe that your life experiences have shaped you, Nicole, to be the leader that you are. And I tell people, if you show me a person who they are naturally, and I'll show you that person who they are spiritually, right? And it's almost like your spirit commands the room. It commands the attention, but there comes responsibility with that. And so we thank you for accepting that call and being the woman and the leader that you are. Take me back to Florida. You grew up in Florida. I did a lot of work in Florida. What part of Florida?
Yeah. So if you think of, Jacksonville's here, right? Orlando's here, Daytona's kind of over here. And right in the middle, there's a lot of woods, and then there's some small towns. And right in the middle is where I was. So kind of that north central Florida. So one stoplight. My family lived in a double wide trailer until we moved to a single wide trailer on cinder blocks, and we spent a lot of time in food lines and on welfare. And that was not it wasn't necessarily unusual in the area that we lived in, but, there was a lot of range. I'll just tell you that there was, in that area, there was a lot of range. There were, a lot of people that were doing very well. There were a lot of people that were doing, okay. And then there were people that were really struggling. And we kind of fell into that last category.
Yeah, same story here in North Carolina, and I'm sure other parts of the nation, people listening probably saying, yeah, that's my experience too. We grew up same way, single wide trailer, a double wide trailer on center blocks, same story. And, thinking about that, there's a song that a group called the Winans used to say, I remember when life was so easy. And back then it wasn't easy to you, but the simplicity of what that life was much, much easier. So when you were small and Nicole was growing up, what did you have ambitions to be, Nicole? What did you think would happen with your life? Yeah.
Well, I feel like, the expectations were kind of low. I'll just be really transparent with you, Tony. And, we didn't have a lot. My parents were both sick. My dad had a terminal illness. He passed away when I was 19. And my mom struggled with mental illness for, all of my childhood. So we had a lot of adult worries. So for me, I think there was always sort of, when I was old enough to understand what was happening, I think my aspirations were not probably what you would expect. I started working as a dishwasher when I was 13. I started working full time when I was 15. So I was more worried about things like covering the rent and covering electricity and, taking care of some of those, more basic household needs. So my aspirations were, I think, different. And then once I always wanted to go to college. I didn't end up going to college until later in life when I was already leading teams, which, gave me a lot of really interesting perspective, around it. So I didn't even end up finishing college until, I was later in life. But, at one point I wanted to be a lawyer. That was interesting. And, I thought, well, this would be neat. I like, every kid goes through that phase, right? They like to argue. So they want to be the lawyer. But, I never sat down and said, well, I want to lead people. I want to work with a lot of people. And, I just kind of ended up falling into that and moving into the healthcare space. And there's, a whole story around that. But I don't tell any of this as a sad story, because I feel like this, Tony. Even though it is a bit of a sad story at the beginning, it was forming me. And that beginning, you don't get to choose where you start, but right. You get to choose what you do with it. And what a blessing that is, because, I say this a lot and I encourage people in this a lot. Leadership, leading people, responsibility, all of those things are going to show up before you're ready.
Yes.
And then you have to decide how you're going to carry that. And right. And that beginning, that I had no idea at the time, but that beginning is where my leadership journey actually started.
Mm-hmm. That's where you were made. You were forged in that fire. It will find you, Nicole. Whatever your life's purpose, it will eventually speak to you and it will find you and you will find it. I love this conversation because so many people listening, for our younger people listening, you don't have to always go that traditional route. You don't have to do the high school and then the college and find the job. There are other avenues that you can take in your life and they all lead to that same place. And it's refreshing to hear you say how you started out washing dishes and now you're a leader amongst men and women, but you found that place and you can do these things. If you could speak to younger people listening, can you give them a word of encouragement saying, hey, you can do this?
Yeah. I think the way that I would look at it is, closed mouths don't get fed, right? I'm saying that. We've all heard that phrase in a lot of different ways. And I don't look at it as though, well, it's your responsibility to go make everything happen for yourself. I look at it as though, don't put a lid on yourself. Don't put a limit on yourself. A delayed path isn't a failed path. It's exactly the right thing to get you where you need to be. And, I speak a lot to women, but also just to young people in general. I have 3 kids in their 20s. They probably take my advice with a varying, degree, right? I'm mom, right, to them. But I'll tell you that the potential of people is so great and so wonderful. And I see so many people put a lid on themselves. So if you think about it like, I don't need to be invited into the room. I don't need to wonder. You don't need to wonder if you belong in that room that you're in. I've been in so many rooms that have shaped me. And many times I was the youngest person. Many times I was the least educated person. Many times I felt as though I was the least qualified to be there. And at the end of the day, if you stop worrying about whether you belong in that room and you start thinking about what that room needs from you, you become a lot less afraid to go pull up a chair and go sit down and go say the thing, have the conversation, put yourself out there, and then you position yourself to be able to help other people later. And that's the way I look at it. I have had a lot of opportunities from different people that have given me a chance, have mentored me, have sponsored me over the years. And now I just get the opportunity to try to help give that back.
Yeah, pay it forward, right? One blessing in all of this, no matter how we grew up, and you and I have some shared experiences. I tell people when things are at their worst, guess what? Nicole and Tony can recall what it was like when you didn't have these things, and we can still survive. And I think that's a problem with some of the generations after us and preceding our kids' generation. They don't know what that survival instinct is because they grow up in a society that is fast forward. But because we know what it looks like to create that environment, to actually raise your own food, to put your hands in the dirt, to wash dishes, there's something that we can recall to say, you know what? I know how to go do that if all else fails. And so when I'm talking to young kids, I try to tell them, enjoy this ride that you're on, but make sure you incorporate every experience that you have, because at some point you're going to have to recall that. You're going to have to lean on that. And so, Nicole, growing up around scarcity, now that you're in the place that you're in now, how did that shape you with how you see money and leadership and authority, power? How does that affect you now?
Yeah, sometimes it's a slippery slope, right, Tony? Because it can be dangerous in a way when you grow up around scarcity and then you have resources, right? It can be, you can get this, closed fist mindset, right? And so for me, the way that I look at this is, it did impact me in all three of these areas. And, with money, I try to hold resources as something that I answer for, not something that I simply own. And, never forget that people are depending on those decisions, making with money, especially as a business owner. And so, but I try not to hold on to it too tightly, because that's the risk, right? I saw this quote recently, and it was attributed to Marcus Aurelius. And it was, what are you so afraid of losing when nothing in this world belongs to you? And isn't that so great, right? And it really spoke to me, because when you have not had, and then you have, and, just to the point of even, you have had such scarce resources and then you have some resources, you can understand that perspective, because it can be tempting, to go, well, this belongs to me or this is mine. But, when you look at it that way, nothing in this world really belongs to me. At the end of the day, I mean, everything that I have, I'm very open about my faith. Everything I have is a gift from God, whether that's, my family, whether that's any possession that I have. And I believe in life and in leadership, we are supposed to approach things with open hands and not closed fists toward people.
Yeah.
Every time I have done that, every time, Tony, that I have opened my hands or I've shared something, it never returns void. It is always, it's a blessing to someone else, or it ends up as a blessing to me later. So, that does shape you, though, because you can very easily find yourself one way or the other when you grow up around very scarce resources.
Yeah, two scriptures that came to mind when you said that. One is the Bible says, the blessings of the Lord maketh rich and addeth no sorrow. And then one of my favorite scriptures is, for what is your life? It's a thin vapor that appeareth and then vanishes away. And so when I got diagnosed with cancer, the thing that I realized was the time that you thought you had, you never had it anyway. I'm an engineer by trade. I had 200 employees when I got diagnosed in 2021 at that peak of COVID. Had my company for over 20 plus years, and we were doing well. And then COVID hit, and you know how that was for the entire nation. Companies were rescinding contracts and everybody just trying to figure it all out. And then I found myself in the hospital fighting for my life. And one thing that you said that struck me was what we have is not for us, and that closed fist. And I remember I had a situation where I was like, do I need to lay off a lot of employees and do these things? And I told my accountant, I said, well, you know what? Let's just continue to pay these people, because some of those people had worked for me for 15 to 20 years and they were doing the holidays. And I just thought that was the right thing to do. And she was like, well, you know, you could save yourself $1 million if you didn't do that. Here I was fighting for my life, and I was still thinking about my employees. And I really believe, Nicole, that through my journey, initially they gave me 1 to 3 years to live. This is year 5. I was diagnosed with 2 stage 4 cancers, both lymphoma, Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's, which is a unicorn experience by itself to have both. And I'm still here. And I believe some of those things and steps in the unclenched hand that I had giving back to others, I believe instead of rewarding me monetarily, I think God rewarded me with my life. And I believe those experiences shaped me, and what I was doing, to your point, extended my life with him. He gave me grace. And so, yes, what you said is very true. What we have and the possessions that we have is easy to say, I work for this, but you work for it to give it to someone else, to help someone else. And I think that's what we're missing now in society.
Yeah, I think it is really missing, Tony. And, you know, I mean, I think about any time that I've had an opportunity to lead in a certain way that was a little different than maybe what was expected, right? I mean, I'm gonna back up a little bit, because I'm gonna share another scripture with you that is one of my absolute favorites, and it Proverbs 27 verse 23, and it's know the condition of your flocks. Know the condition of your flocks, right? It's not, don't manage them, don't control them, but I look at flocks, right, as your community, the people that you're interacting with, the people that you have some influence over or some influence around. And it's not like, you know, you're in charge of these people. These are the people that are experiencing you regularly, right? And so when we think about, you know, leading through faith, and we think about leading in sometimes what is a non-traditional way, I mean, there have been times, there was a time many years ago where I had to do layoffs in one of the companies that I was with, and it was really difficult. And, you know, HR didn't recommend what we did. You know, everything that we were trained to do said, you know, move fast and protect the business, and, you know, just say the minimum. And I feel like that was the right thing to do. So we did the opposite. We slowed down. We communicated about it 6 months ahead of time. We took this risk, right? We gave people more time, you know, and I wasn't calm in that season at all. I was praying for courage. I was asking God, what is happening? I feel like we did the right things. Why is this happening? But what I kept sensing was, do not let fear teach you how to lead. You can lead with care, or you can lead with fear. And I always want to choose to lead with care. I am not perfect at this. I get a lot of things wrong. If anybody from my company like watches this or listens to it, they should probably be tell you about this time with her. But what I will always be is authentic and direct with you. You know, so I don't get this always right, but my goal is always like care first. Put that care first, and that has never returned void. I mean, that is my. I really believe, you know, not to downplay any of my skill set here, but, you know, I know that, you know, when God puts me in a room, it's because he has something that he wants to do through me, or he has something that he needs me to do. And, you know, and it's really not about me. It's about the people that are in front of me.
Yeah, you literally can change the atmosphere, and you probably have experienced this. I've been in board meetings, and you can feel the atmosphere shift when you come in the room. Positive or negatively, to say the least. But
it's in the room before you even walk in. Oh, it's one of my core philosophies, Tony. It's like, raise the energy in the room. Raise the energy in the room. You can drain it, or you can raise it. And, you know, like I said, I don't always get this right. I'm sure there have been times where someone messages me and goes, man, you just joined that meeting, and people were like, whoop.
Oh,
what was she talking, man, because at the same token, I care about you too much to leave you the way I found you. And I
that's
hope
right.
you feel the same way about me. So I am going to always look at how I can leave a situation better, how I can leave a person better than I found them. But I'm going to try to do it in a way that raises the energy, that lifts somebody up, that helps them to see their potential. But sometimes, that involves saying the things that have to be said. It involves putting the fish on the table. You got to have some of that that authenticity. That's where leading without the mask comes in. You're not worried about what people think of you. You're worried about whether you're doing the right things.
I told my medical team that, I was going through a chemotherapy and lymphoma is a blood cancer. And so at one point I told my team, here's the thing. If someone has a blood cancer and you're killing all the cells in my blood, why aren't we trying to find out what is causing these cells to be rogue in my blood? I said, it seems like we're focused on killing cells and not figuring out why these cells are behaving. And so they kind of looked at me. And so I went home, I was driving home, and I'm telling you, Nicole, it was like God gave me this blueprint because when I was in school, I double majored. I was going to go to medical schools. I was in civil engineering and pre-med. I took the MCATs, right? But I didn't go to medical school. I went the engineering route. And so I came home. I said, I know how to do all this. So I set up a lab in my house, right? And I started mixing up stuff and whipping up stuff and things that are targeted for the mitochondria, right? And to increase my T cell production. All these things that are anti-kill cells, I was enriching the cells that I had. And so long story short, so went through the chemo, didn't give us the results we wanted. Went through CAR T therapy, that didn't give us the results that we wanted. And so I was like, man, this is not working, right? And then 8 months later, we realized like, you got a second cancer, another stage 4. What we found was that the CAR T therapy, and in fact did work, but CAR T cells are programmed for that specific cancer, right? It was programmed for the non-Hodgkin's. It wasn't programmed for a Hodgkin's lymphoma. So we thought it had failed, but it didn't. So when we identified the second cancer, my doctor looked at me and said, you know what, Tony, what do you want to do? I said, I don't want to do anything. So I said, no protocol, no treatment. I said, no, I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to double down on what I'm doing. Nicole, I did that. She said, okay, we're going to see you in 4 more months and we got to see what's going on with this. Came back 4 months later, cancer hadn't moved, right? Nothing had happened. 6 weeks after that, cancer still hadn't moved. And so a couple months ago, she said, Tony, you know what? We're going to just do this your way. She said, apparently what you're doing is working and we're not going to do anything to offset that, but it's the control of the room. I think over time they saw the measure of faith that I had, but they also saw the works that was involved because the Bible tells us faith without works is dead. So you can have faith, but if you're not putting in that work to amplify that, then it's still no good to you. But she saw I was putting in the work. I was putting in the exercise. The things that I was taking and doing had basically neutralized this second cancer. And I walk in and out of that hospital freely with no treatments. I take no medicines, nothing. I'm back on my bike riding 100 miles a day if I want to. I'm in the gym. I'm doing all these things. And it's because of the faith and the plan that God gives you is how you change that room. So I echo what you're saying right now.
Yeah, it's the steady thing, right? It really is. And it's something, I love what you said because it's something you demonstrate. It's not something that you declare, right? It's something you're demonstrating and people are reading, just like your energy, people are reading your faith in how you act, not when things are going well, not when things are going the way you planned, but they're reading it in how you act when things stop going the way you planned, whether you meant to show them that or not. So the best way that we can show our faith is not in just declaring it, but it's in behavior. It's in whether you choose care over self-protection in the business world. It's whether you're bringing a steady energy to the room, whether you're giving clarity to people when it would be easier to just avoid the conversation. Are you showing up in the same way in word and in deed? And are you showing that integrity? And Ecclesiastes has a lot of really, really good. I was like diving into that. One of how you're in church sometimes and there's the sermon and they tell you to go over here and they say, wait, flip over to this chapter. And I'm that person with ADD and constantly 57 tabs open in my brain. So I'm in here already now reading this other chapter. I'm like, we're not even on Ecclesiastes, but I'm like digging into all this stuff on work and on your faith and on just, this conflict that sometimes we have, right? Of, well, work harder or demonstrate your faith in a more overt way, or but you can really kind of blend those two things together.
Absolutely. Nicole, I walked into the hospital as a patient and came out as a board member because I'm on the board at UNC Chapel Hill and at Duke, and I went in as a cancer patient. You change these outcomes and it will find you. Nicole, you have spent more than 2 decades inside of healthcare. How did you get into that space?
Yeah, I'd love to tell you there was a master plan on that one, Tony, but there wasn't. So I came in through the business and the operations side, and it was really by way of needing work and being good at seeing patterns and closing loops and getting things done. So, it's one of my first jobs in healthcare. It was somewhat proximity. I worked full time in high school, actually doing medical billing for a DME company, medical equipment company. And then I needed, more full time work after I graduated, and I was doing this, crazy commute to work for an insurance company. And I looked and I went, wow, there's a cardiology practice right here. And so I put on a suit and I had my little stack of printed resumes and, because those were the days, right? You could just walk in with a stack of resumes. And I said, I live right down the street. I really need a job. What can I do here? Here's my experience. What can I do here? And you know what? And this was, I was living in upstate New York at the time after I graduated. And this was the best, pivotal thing, because it was a practice. It was from like a 4-story practice. Everything was all in the same, the rehab facility, the physicians were all there, the billing office was there, scheduling, reception, everything. So I got to learn really the business of healthcare from the ground up. And I worked so hard for that place because they gave me a chance. Because I showed up at the right time and I had my resume and they gave me a chance. So, I kind of fell into it, through some of those things. But what keeps me in it, Tony, is there's this tension that sits inside healthcare. It's a mission, but it's also a business. And we are all the patient sometime, right? Like you talked about, you go from patient to board member. We are all the patient at some point, or we have some loved one who's going through something. And, and I experienced this quite recently, actually. And, the people that go into the health side, whether it's the clinical piece or the business side, you often do come for the mission, but you spend your days fighting the business part. So I felt like I found I was good at standing in that gap and helping to keep the operation strong enough so that the clinical team could do the work that matters with the patients. And over 2 decades later, going on 27 years of it, the people are still what keep me here.
Yeah, it's your why, right? I spoke at ASCO. I'm sure you know what ASCO is. And so I spoke at the one in Chicago in 25. And I spoke about the why, but I said a lot of us talk about the why, but we don't look at the who that's on the other end. So make sure we don't forget that who, because those are the ones that's impacted by your why. And you have good intentions. But when you have the financial components, because like you said, it is a business, it can get muddy sometimes regarding the who. Your why produced a great product, but the cost put it out of reach for the who. Make sure you remember that, people. Nicole remembers her why, and she knows that you're the who. And so, Nicole, tell me a little bit about PBS Radiology. How did that come about?
Yeah, so PBS is a national radiology business services company, and we have very deep roots in the business of radiology. So we operate across 45 states, and we help radiology practices stay financially and operationally strong. And it's inside the system that is constantly pulling against them. And I am the president of the company and one of the co-owners. I have been there about 8 years, and the company has been around for 30 years. We recently, we hit national growth about 15 years ago and have been continuing to grow ever since. And so we operate across the country with employees all over and clients all over. And it's a real blessing. It's such a wonderful industry in radiology, but we get to work with so many other areas as well, even though we're in that specialty niche. The physicians we're working with are serving healthcare across the board. And so, what makes our company a little different is that we came from the other side of the partnership. So, I cut my teeth on, imaging centers, cardiology practices, running practices, and leading within health systems before I ever moved on to more of the vendor side of the partnership. And so, we've recruited and hired people that come from that same background. So we basically build like people that have had to live with the results of what we're building. And, so it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey there. And we have such great teams. And I think what really helps sets us apart is that we have people that care. And that sounds so crazy to say, right? Because you think, well, everybody should care. It's healthcare. It's helping the patient. It's helping physicians. And, but it's so interesting to me. We kind of talked about like generational differences and things. It's so interesting to me how I think work ethic over time, you do end up with fewer and fewer people who really care about the outcome of things and who really care about the people around them. So we've been really fortunate to have that type of company, and we try to really, encourage our people that, understand the why. Every transaction goes back to a patient. And, we want to be able to help our clients to be able to be fairly paid for their work, give them the infrastructure they need to be paid appropriately, and solve this gap between, what practices have to do to remain in business. And we try to sit in that gap so they can keep caring for their patients.
Yeah, we're in a do me society now. Everybody wants instant gratification. They want top pay with no experience. You are a team builder. Nicole, what separates the people who grow and from the ones that kind of stall out?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I'm one word, ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Ownership. I talk about this all the time. It's why I built my leadership brand as owning it, because the people that grow are the ones that take responsibility before somebody hands it to them and before they feel ready. And the ones that stall are the ones that are waiting to be pushed or waiting to feel certain. And, it's not that always that they don't care. Sometimes it's that they haven't had good people sponsoring them or mentoring them. And so, that I like to say we try to give people the tools, give them the encouragement to be able to take that ownership. But that part isn't something I can teach. It's something that you can encourage, especially if someone has been discouraged somewhere else, but for doing the same thing. But it's that ownership. And, and I had to learn something about my own role in this too, Tony. For a long time in my career, I was the easy button for the teams I worked with. Somebody hit a wall. Here I am. I'm your girl. I'm going to solve it. And it felt like good leadership, right? It felt like I was very, I was helping. I was being helpful. But it quietly keeps people small, including yourself, because you are not the easy button. You're the shepherd.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I like that. I like how you tied that in, that you are a shepherd. I use that analogy sometimes too. I said, a sheep can leave anytime they want, right? But that's why you have the dogs there to kind of keep them together. But at any point they want to venture off and see if that grass is greener, they can. But it's not your job to keep people from going. Your job is to prepare people if they leave. And I think sometimes the control that we want to have over people in their lives, we kind of can stifle them and limit them with what they can be because we want to control the trajectory of their career. And I think when you're mentoring and you're pouring into people, sometimes you may not like what come out. They may not stay with you always, but was it for them to stay with you always? And so to tie it into a church culture, if the pastor's job is to preach and tell you the good things about the word and the goodness of God, is it for you to take that and then you take that word out? That's what it should be. But oftentimes we'll find ourselves controlled, and you're not going out and taking that gospel or that word out to others because you're so fixed on being in the building with the same people just like you.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I feel this
You know
so
what
much.
I'm talking about.
I did a whole talk on this, Tony, because I felt so passionately about it. And and it came from a good place, right? I travel a lot for work. And, and it's great 'cause my husband, he comes with me a lot of the time. He's a business owner too. He puts a lot of things down so he can come alongside with me, and, and it's amazing. And so my kids are adults. I don't mind traveling. I love it. I love being able to talk with people. I feel like it's an amazing thing. So, I walked into church, one day, this was a few years ago, and someone said, we haven't seen you in a few weeks. I've been traveling for work. Oh, it's too bad you have a job that makes you travel. I said, don't feel bad for me. I love getting to do that. I said, you know what? I said, and the boardroom is my ministry. And they kind of looked at me in a funny way. And I said, the boardroom is my ministry. The people in front of me are my ministry. Because if you think that your influence is limited to the people in this building and the people in this church,
you
are missing an opportunity. And I wrote a whole talk on it. I actually gave it at my church earlier this year because I felt so strongly about it. And it's a wonderful thing though when we realize that's not a burden. It's not a burden to work. It's not, especially because I can talk about my faith. I'm not pushing it on people, but I get to chat about it, and that's a wonderful thing. And more importantly, I get to live it. So, that just landed with me so much when you said that, because it lived anywhere, especially at work.
People are the church, Nicole. How can the church grow if it's not the people that's going out showing it? It is not the building that we have structured and called it church. It's you. Don't look, we're going down a different road. Let's back up a little bit. Let's get back to it.
I love it though. I love it. I'm like,
yeah. You said that healthcare is a system, as you put it, that often pulls against the people inside it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's this pull between your mission, which is the patient and the clinical care or the research or the breakthroughs, right? And then the margin, which is the reality of you have to pay people to do the work, and things continue to be more expensive. And so a statistic that a lot of people outside healthcare aren't aware of is, when you look at the healthcare spend overall, less than 20% of that actually goes to the clinical side. So that's how much administrative burden and waste and all of these things are happening. And less than 10% of that actually goes to the physician. So when we think about that, right, you have a system where you have people that are entrusted to care for us as patients. They're taking great responsibility. They're taking great, burden, often great, physical, emotional toll on themselves. And yet, this system is costing more and more and more. And less than 10% of that is actually going to these physicians, less than 20% on the clinical care. And so that's what I mean with that pull between mission and margin. Reimbursement continues to go down. Medicare is going down every year. Generally, even when there are moderate increases, it's usually clawed back in some other way. So when you look at that over the last, 20 years or so, adjusted for inflation, it's over 30% reduction. Medicare fee schedule for physicians. And that is really a big driver of this, because at the end of the day, there's a temptation, right, to let the system set the standard for how you are treating people, how you're treating patients, the quality. And, we that are leading in the business of healthcare are often the ones that have to figure that out.
Yeah, it's the standard of care. My board at Duke, part of our responsibility is looking at the different phases in the clinical trial and how can we get the drugs through the certain phases. And oftentimes we have this great discovery, but just because that's not the standard of care, people can't have access to it. I said this a couple of weeks ago. Why are we using chemotherapy in most cases as the frontline standard of care? And the reason is because it's been around for hundreds of years, right? It's cheap. It's like, it might work, it may not. But when we know these novelties and these bispecifics and all these other great breakthroughs should be the standard of care. So why would you make someone go through a chemotherapy that is wreaking havoc on their body, and then when it don't work, oh, we got this over here? And I had chemotherapy. I had R-CHOP, which is terrible. But after R-CHOP, I had CAR-T. But if I could have had CAR-T in the beginning, I wouldn't have needed chemotherapy. So it's the access, it's the financial prudence that comes with that. It's the margins that come with giving someone, at the time, my CAR-T was $1.5 million. Now it's up to 2.5 or more. Who can afford that if you don't have, everybody's not in a position like us, right? Or you don't have the best insurance. And even with that, you blow through your insurance caps. I'm like millions of dollars into this now. But like you said, the why was good, but the who was affected. And how can we make this more acceptable for the who that's on the other end? And so I see that struggle that you're talking about, which kind of leads us into image management, right? I like where you talked a little bit about image management is a theme in your work. What is image management and how do you utilize that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think from an image management standpoint, there's a few different things, right? Like I know this one from the inside because, when we all struggle with things, with how are people perceiving us? A lot of people struggle with imposter syndrome. But for me, when I was growing up in extreme poverty, I became an expert at managing how I was perceived. When you go to school every day wearing the same dirty old pair of jeans and, you overhear your teachers saying things like, not meaning it in a bad way, but saying things like her parents should get her a decent outfit, and when you're constantly on the hook, so to speak, for other people's generosity, right? You start to really, you start to want to be small, right? You don't want people to notice certain things. You read a room and you decide where do you fit in before anybody even opens their mouth. And, so I became an expert at that, at trying to make sure, after all those years, I want to make sure I fit in. I don't want anybody to ever look at me with that pity or, with that disgust or anything like that. And so, I tried to become this very polished version of myself. And, when people have to work around that polished version of you to find the real one, it is not a good thing. Yeah. They're always going to be working with a mask. And you are going to be managing perception so much that you are never going to be able to be authentic. And then you will have a problem. And so, I really had to face that. It's been a journey over a period of years having to face that. I still at times struggle with it, but that's, some of it is with having that scarcity mindset, right? But the thing with image management, right, is it's like you're constantly holding up this mirror, right? And you're constantly, what will they think of me? Did I say the right thing? Did I wear the right thing? Did my presentation sound in this way? And when I'm looking at a mirror, Tony, what happens? What happens to that person in front of me? I stop seeing them. So it's one of those things. Image management is one of those things that at the end of the day, when we let it go, we can see the people that we are engaging with. We can see the people that we are leading with so much better. And for me, it really helped me to be able to be more authentic in every room I was in. The nicest compliment somebody has probably ever given me was they were one of our clients at one point. They came to work with us a couple years ago. And one of the things they said to me was, "You're the same." I said, "What do you mean?" "You're the same. You're the same when you're in the town hall that I watched, and you were the same when I was your client, and you're the same now that when you're team members, and you're the same in an executive team meeting." And I said, "Well, that's kind of the point, right?" First I was like, "Thank you," because that's a great compliment. And it really got me thinking, how can we encourage people to be the best version of themselves, right? To keep encouraging them, but also to be the same. Like, I don't want you to work with a mask.
It's hard because society with social media, a lot of these things we didn't have to deal with. We dealt with real people. Now people are dealing with people that really don't know them, but they let them in their lives, and that helps shape or create the mask they're putting on. Society rewards you for the fake imagery, the fake look, all these things. But back then it was real. I grew up in the deep South here in North Carolina, and my little small hometown, we still had the Klan running around doing stuff. And so you were going to school with people that may have sympathized with that. And I always was really athletic and I was super smart. And so it made me remember being in the room when I was the only one in the room, right? and you looking around and you trying to figure out where do I belong, but no one looks like you. And then your intelligence is based on a one-off. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I know how you feel. I remember one time in my office, funny story. So my office was downtown Raleigh in one of the high rises, right? I was on the 20th floor, and I was the most senior in the entire building. I'd been in there the longest. And so these two men, salesmen and people come up all the time to your offices trying to sell you stuff. So one day I got in the elevator with two gentlemen, and they were saying, yeah, I said, good morning. They was like, good morning. It was like, I said, so where you guys headed? They said, oh, we're going to In-Stock Solutions. That was the name of my company. And yeah, I was like, oh, okay. I never told them who I was and that. And so we just going up, but all of us pushing the 20th floor. And so they was like, yeah. I was like, so what y'all going up there for? They was like, oh, we're just going to see if you want to sell some services. They was trying to sell some services. And I was like, okay. I was like, yeah, that's a pretty good company. And they was like, yeah, we heard this old rich white man owned the company. I was like, oh, okay, right. And so we going up, Nicole, we get off the elevator on the 20th floor. They go right, I go right. And so they was like, is this guy following us? So they get to my office door, right? And they get to the door, they open the door, and my secretary didn't see me behind them. So they opened the door, and I hear her say, well, good morning. And they was like, we're here to see Mr. Williams. She was like, oh, that's him right behind you. You should have seen their faces. It was so funny. It was so funny.
I love it.
You should have saw their faces. So when you're looking around and you're in spaces and places that you're trying to reduce, and sometimes we reduce our talents and skill because we want to fit in.
Don't be small.
We don't want to shine.
Don't be small. And the thing about image management too that's really crazy, because it drains the energy that should be going toward your leading, right? And toward your interacting with people. But you know what else it does? When you take that away from yourself, you start to realize some of the things that you've assumed about other people.
Yeah, you do.
You start to realize some of that bias maybe you've been carrying around, a little bit. I know I've found that for myself, but I always kind of laugh because I'm like, I'm a 5'2" woman in an industry of, sorry, but 6'3" men. So, I looked around one day and I went, why am I wearing heels to these conferences? Well, it's, so you don't feel like the shortest person sitting there in a conversation like, hey, look at me, look here. So I went, well, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to do that anymore. So now I wear the cute sneakers and I wear a very bright colored suit and I just talk loudly enough where you can't mistake me. And it doesn't hurt my feet. And it feels more authentic. So, that's such a silly little example, right? But when you are sort of accustomed to not being exactly what people think, I love when we're at an event or something and, and people don't know us. So they walk up, they introduce themselves to my husband and they'll ask, and they'll introduce themselves to me, but then they'll ask him what he does. And then we're sitting there waiting and he goes, well, don't you want to know what my wife does?
Yeah, then they'll finally get around to you, right?
More interested in that.
Yeah. I love that. This is empowering for all the young ladies and ladies here listening to a female boss of just that perspective that you had of the why, right? Why are you wearing heels? Because you want to be not short. You want to be tall. You want to be represented. You want to be full in that room, your presence. But your presence alone was enough. That's huge what you just said. Let's move on. From welfare to the boardroom, I want to get into that a little bit. Your keynote, that is really impactful. That's heavy. That's heavyweight right there. How did you come up with that keynote title, and fill us in on the backstory of welfare to the boardroom?
Yeah, it's very personal to me. It's deeply personal. And, part of where I came up with it was I really started thinking about, all these different rooms that have shaped me, right? And, the boardroom was at one point, it's kind of a metaphorical now, right? Because so many of us are virtual, right? We have these remote companies, but, the boardroom was at one point the most intimidating place for me, right? Like, you go back 25 years and here I am sitting there, a lot of times one of the youngest people in there, talking to all these people, and I think, well, who am I? What do I have to offer? I don't belong in here. And, this title really came from, and this concept really came from the fact that I'm proud of that beginning, because at the end of the day, this is not a success story. I want to be really clear about that. It is not a, look, I was here and then I ended up here and look what I overcame. If somebody leaves that talk or reads something that I wrote about this and they're impressed with me, then I have missed the mark. What I want people to understand from that is permission and responsibility. You get permission because wherever you started does not get the final word. And a delayed path, as we've said, a nonlinear path isn't a failed one. And then I hope people see that title or see that concept or hear that keynote and think responsibility, because anyone in that room that is hearing that keynote has been seen by somebody at the right moment.
That's
and
right.
Almost everybody now is in a position to be able to be that person for someone else, whether that's personally, whether that's at your own kitchen table, whether that's volunteering, whether that's at work, wherever. And I want people thinking about their own story differently and thinking about who they can lift. So that's where From Welfare to the Boardroom came from, because it does, first of all, it's kind of catchy, right? And you go, I want to know more. And second, it shares that, I think it talks about possibility. It helps people understand and be thinking about helping other people rise. That's the whole point of telling it. I don't believe our stories should be wasted. And my life really changed a few years ago when I started thinking about this and going, Nicole, why aren't you talking about this more? People would say, you have this amazing story. People that knew me well, they would, this amazing story. You have a story that people write books about. And I said, oh, no, that's not me. No, but then when I started actually talking about it, I went, well, if people can see themselves in this, it feels less about me and a lot more like it's about being helpful and helping other people rise. So that's the way I look at it, Tony. And that's really where the title came from.
Yeah, we find ourselves in each other. You and I having this conversation, and I can see parts of myself in what you're saying. I'm sure the listeners can too. And so if someone is listening to this and they're standing at the beginning of a hard chapter in their life, what would you say to them?
Oh boy. I mean, there's a lot I would say, but I would say first, like I always told my kids this, nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems. Ever. If it seems wonderful, it's probably not as good as it seems. If it seems horrible, it's not as bad as it seems. And everything in this life is temporary. Every single thing. So if you are in the middle of a valley or whether you're on the mountain, first of all, God's with you. I will always tell someone that. They can receive it. They cannot receive it. That's okay. But I would say practically, you're not behind. You're not alone. Even though it might feel like both of those things right now, if you're in a difficult chapter, but something's showing up that is difficult for you, or something showing up before you're ready, that doesn't mean you're failing. That doesn't mean you're behind. It's probably that you're becoming.
That's right.
The hardest chapters in my life, and I mean this literally because I've started to write about a lot of them, is the very hardest things. They have been a becoming to me. And I would say one other thing, stop spending your energy managing how whatever you're going through looks. Don't be afraid to talk about it, because most people are good people. Most people that are around you, they want to help you. They want to know what they can do to help. They care. There's always going to be some that don't. Everybody has different capacities. And I've been surrounded by a lot of people more in my earlier years, but that didn't have a capacity to care in a certain way. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means they're wired a little differently. And so, don't spend too much energy managing how your difficult season looks. Ask for help. Reach out. That's what I would tell them, because your story is going to end up being something that will help somebody else one day. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, you have not because you ask not. I think sometimes we are too proud to ask for that help, because there is someone that will help you. And you may get a few no's, or people may ignore you, but it's going to be that one that when you get to them, they're going to be there for you and see what they can do to help you. And that's kind of what we're here to do. We're here to provide guidance and leadership and help for all of those that are listening, because we are just like you. We are at the same kitchen table having the same types of conversations. Nicole, we're getting down to the end. You want to do a quick rapid fire segment?
All right, let's do it.
Let's fire off. Coffee or tea?
Coffee. All the coffee. And I always have like 3 beverages around me at any given point. There's like protein shake, there's a coffee. Sometimes there's a hot coffee and an iced coffee, which don't even get me started on that. But I probably drink too much coffee.
Oh man, we got to stay away from you. Coffee or tea? You said coffee. First job you ever had?
Washing dishes. And
Washing dishes.
Washes all the dishes here. He knows I don't like to do it. I got too much of it then.
All right. The book that changed how you think about life.
The 5 Love Languages by Gary
That's
Chapman.
a good one.
It's a wonderful one. And it's not just about relationships and, like your partner in life, but it applies to any relationship and to business. And at the end of the day, it's really about understanding someone else without trying to put your own understanding on them, right?
For me, it was Good to Great. And then Why Should White Boys Have All the Fun? That's a good one. Early morning or late night?
Early morning. Get done.
You're a gym girly?
I am. It's so funny. I had been on a little bit of a gym hiatus for a couple months because we had a lot going on. And I went back to the gym last week and it was like going home. It's so good. So good. So yeah.
Good to be home.
Yeah.
Get it done, Dorothy.
Yep.
One word that describes where you grew up.
Formative.
Okay, that's a big word. You got to break that down for the people.
Formative. It's there are a lot of negative words I could probably use, but I feel like, it would be doing a disservice to call it anything but, something that shaped me, something that formed me because, you can't change. You don't want to go back and change any of those things if they brought you to where you are.
One word that describes where you are now.
Grateful.
Yes, love that.
Always grateful. There's always something to be grateful for, Tony.
Leadership quality you respect most in others.
You could probably guess this one. Ownership.
I underscored that several times in this conversation. Ownership, leadership quality you're still working on yourself.
Trusting other people to carry the weight. Trusting other people to carry it. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that one. I used to tell my managers, you have to be able to manage the information skillfully. And if I don't trust you with that, guess what? You're not getting any information, And so, yeah, you're right. It's that trustworthiness and leaning on people to trust them. Best advice you ignored.
You know what? My aunt, when I was growing up, she would always say, you got to take the bitter with the sweet. And, and I never really quite understood that. I always thought, why do we have to have the bitter? And because at that point I had a lot more bitter than the sweet. And when I became an adult, I understood that a lot more. That you take the valley, you take the difficult things because you're going to end up coming through it. There's going to be something for you on the other side of that. And once I learned that, it really helped me not to sit in it when something does happen.
Would that be the advice that you would give younger Nicole?
No, I would honestly, I would say to younger Nicole, it's going to sound so simple, but I would say you're going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. It is all going to be okay.
Finish this sentence and we'll sign off with this one. Eagles don't quack because
complaining never got anybody anywhere. Owner does.
That's a lot of quacking, right? Nicole Jones-Gerbino. Built, not broken. Thank you so much for being here with us, Nicole. This was a pleasure, and we definitely have to do part 2. This was not enough time.
I agree. An hour went by just like that. It was so great to hear more of your story, Tony, and get to talk with you. It's like talking to an old friend. I appreciate it.
So how can the people find you, Nicole?
Yeah. So you can follow me on LinkedIn, which I think I'm the only Nicole Jones-Gerbino if you look up there. And then also my website, where I have a blog and I talk about leadership real time as I'm living it in my company, Nicole Jones-Gerbino.
Love it. You heard it here. Nicole, thank you so much. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too, Tony. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.